Rain fell in heavy sheets across the cemetery, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. Maxwell Grant, CEO of Grant Enterprises and one of America's most formidable billionaires, stood alone beneath a black umbrella, his imposing 6'2" frame rigid with tension. The small gathering of mourners had dissipated quickly after the service, leaving him in solitude before Margaret Wilson's freshly covered grave. "Goodbye, Maggie," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the downpour. 22 years had passed since he'd last seen her. 22 years of building an empire, of transforming himself from an ambitious young entrepreneur into a titan of industry worth $8.2 billion. 22 years of emptiness he'd filled with acquisitions, mergers, and the relentless pursuit of success. As he turned to leave, two figures caught his eye, teenagers no more than 16, standing beneath the shelter of a nearby oak tree. Their matching dark hair and solemn expressions struck him immediately. Twins. There was something eerily familiar about their features that made Maxwell pause. When they realized he had noticed them, they approached with hesitant steps. The girl spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Grant, I'm Emma Wilson. This is my brother, Ethan." Maxwell nodded curtly, uncomfortable with the intrusion into his private moment of grief. He'd come alone deliberately, having instructed his assistant to keep the funeral arrangements quiet. "Our mother just died," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm aware," Maxwell replied coolly. "Margaret and I were acquaintances long ago." The twins exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then Emma reached into her coat pocket and withdrew an envelope, creased and worn, as if it had been opened and refolded many times. "Our mother told us that if anything ever happened to her, we should find you at her funeral. She said to give you this." Maxwell took the envelope, his usually steady hands trembling slightly. His name was written across the front in handwriting he still recognized after all these years. "She also told us something else," Ethan added, his eyes, a striking blue that seemed to pierce through Maxwell, fixed firmly on the billionaire's face. "She said that you're our guardian now." The world seemed to tilt beneath Maxwell's feet. The umbrella slipped from his grasp, allowing the rain to soak through his custom Armani suit. He barely noticed. "That's impossible," he said, his voice hoarse. "I can't be your guardian. I didn't even know." He stopped abruptly, a terrible suspicion dawning as he looked more closely at the teenagers standing before him. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their jawline, features he saw in his own mirror every morning. "My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already sparked your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey. If you've ever had a moment when your life changed in the blink of an eye, subscribe to this channel now and share in the comments below what was the most shocking revelation you've ever received, just like our protagonist is experiencing right now. Also, tell me which city you're watching this story from. Each message and subscription gives me strength to bring you more stories that will stir your deepest emotions." Maxwell tore open the envelope with uncharacteristic clumsiness, his composure completely shattered. Inside was a letter and what appeared to be a birth certificate. No, 2 birth certificates. His eyes scanned the documents, growing wider with each line he read. Emma and Ethan Wilson. Date of birth, March 15th, 2008. Mother, Margaret Wilson. Father, Maxwell Grant. The letter began simply, "Max, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. These are your children. I never told you because..." The rain intensified, washing over the 3 of them as they stood frozen in a moment that would forever alter the course of their lives. Maxwell Grant, the man known for his ruthless business acumen and emotional detachment, felt something cracked within him, the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble in the face of a truth he never could have prepared for. The sleek black Bentley glided through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets, its interior unnaturally silent. Maxwell sat rigid in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the twins seated across from him. They were examining the opulent vehicle with barely concealed awe, a reaction Maxwell typically enjoyed from others, but now it only intensified his discomfort. "Where are we going?" Emma finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. "My penthouse," Maxwell replied tersely, "until I figure this situation out." His driver, Jenkins, caught his eye in the rearview mirror, his expression carefully neutral. In 15 years of service, Jenkins had never seen his employer bring children to his residence. "Derek, these are," Maxwell faltered, the words sticking in his throat. "This is Emma and Ethan Wilson. They'll be staying with me temporarily." Jenkins nodded, betraying no surprise. "Very good, sir." 20 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open to reveal Maxwell's penthouse, a 12,000-square-foot monument to modern luxury overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, now hazy behind sheets of rain. "You live here alone?" Ethan asked, his sneakers squeaking against the marble flooring. "Yes," Maxwell answered, watching as the twins took in their surroundings. The question seemed oddly perceptive, or perhaps accusatory. He led them through the vast living room with its minimalist furnishings, all steel, glass, and white leather that had been selected by his interior designer. It struck him suddenly how cold and impersonal the space was, not a home, but a statement. "Are you hungry?" he asked, realizing he had no idea how to host teenagers, or anyone for that matter. Clients and business associates were entertained at restaurants, never here. They nodded hesitantly. "I'll order something," he said, reaching for his phone. Another realization hit him. He had no idea what 16-year-olds ate. "Preferences? Pizza?" Ethan suggested, looking to his sister for confirmation. Maxwell nodded and made the call, ordering from what his assistant had once mentioned was the city's best pizzeria. While he spoke, he noticed Emma had withdrawn Margaret's letter from her pocket and was reading it again, her expression unreadable. "Have you read this?" she asked when he finished the call. "Not entirely," he admitted. The cemetery revelation had been too overwhelming, and the drive too awkward. Emma held it out to him. "Maybe you should." With reluctance, Maxwell took the letter and moved to the window wall, putting distance between himself and the twins. His eyes traced Margaret's familiar handwriting. "Max, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. These are your children. I never told you because you made it clear that night, our last night, that your future had no room for a family. Your ambitions were too important, your trajectory too steep. When I discovered I was pregnant weeks later, I made the choice to raise our children alone rather than be an obstacle to your dreams. I've watched your rise from afar, every achievement, every milestone. I told Emma and Ethan about you, not everything, but enough. They know you're brilliant, determined, and capable of incredible things. What they don't know is whether you're capable of love. I have no family left to care for them. You are their father, their only living relative. I'm not asking you to love them immediately, though they deserve that and more. I'm asking you to give them a chance. Give yourself a chance at the life you dismissed so easily all those years ago. They have your eyes, Max, and more of your spirit than you could possibly imagine. Always, Maggie." Maxwell folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. He turned to find the twins watching him intently. "Did she suffer?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The cancer moved quickly," Ethan replied. "The doctors said that was a blessing." Maxwell nodded, trying to process this information alongside everything else. Margaret was gone. He had children, 16-year-old children he'd never known existed. His carefully ordered world was crumbling around him. "I have a meeting tomorrow morning that I can't reschedule," he said abruptly, falling back on the familiar territory of business. "My assistant will help get you settled. We have guest rooms on the East Wing. I'll have someone bring your belongings from—" He trailed off, realizing he knew nothing about their lives. "Where have you been living?" "Brookhaven, on Long Island," Emma supplied. "We've lived in the same house our whole lives. A house in the suburbs." Maxwell tried to imagine Margaret there, raising their children alone while he acquired companies and built skyscrapers. "Mom was a high school English teacher," Ethan added, as if reading Maxwell's thoughts. We don't have much, but we were happy. We're happy. The past tense hit Maxwell like a physical blow. These children had lost everything: their mother, their home, their sense of security, and now found themselves with a stranger who happened to share their DNA. The intercom buzzed, announcing the pizza's arrival. As Maxwell moved to answer it, his phone rang. The display showed Charlotte Winters, CFO, his chief financial officer, calling about tomorrow's crucial merger negotiation. For the first time in his professional life, Maxwell Grant hit decline on a business call. Morning light filtered through the automated blinds of Maxwell's penthouse, waking him from a fitful sleep on his office sofa. He hadn't been able to bring himself to retire to his bedroom, knowing there were two strangers, his children, sleeping down the hall. The reality of his situation hit him anew with the clarity of daybreak. His phone buzzed with messages. 37 new emails had arrived overnight, all marked urgent. Maxwell ignored them, something he'd never done before, and instead pulled up his browser. He typed Margaret Wilson obituary and found it immediately. The photograph accompanying the notice showed a woman with laugh lines around her eyes and silver streaking her dark hair. She looked different from the Margaret of his memories. Younger, more vibrant, yet unmistakably her. The obituary was brief, but revealing. Beloved English teacher at Brookhaven High School for 20 years. Survived by her twin children, Emma and Ethan. A soft knock interrupted his research. Maxwell closed the browser quickly, feeling oddly like he'd been caught doing something inappropriate. "Come in," he called, straightening his rumpled shirt. Emma stood in the doorway, already dressed in the clothes she'd worn yesterday. Her resemblance to Margaret was even more apparent in the morning light, though her eyes, Maxwell's eyes, told a different story. "We have school today," she said without preamble. "We should get back to Brookhaven." Maxwell checked his watch, 7:15 a.m. The acquisition meeting was at 9. "I'll have my driver take you," he replied, reaching for his phone. It was a convenient solution to his immediate dilemma. "And then what?" Emma asked, her tone challenging. "We just go back to our empty house, pretend everything's normal?" The question hung in the air between them. Maxwell had been so focused on the shock of discovery that he hadn't thought through the practical implications. Where would they live? Who would care for them? The suburban home was presumably part of Margaret's estate, but what about day-to-day guardianship? "Have you been appointed my legal guardian?" he asked, shifting to the familiar territory of legal frameworks. "Do you have documentation?" Emma's expression hardened. "Mom's letter isn't enough. Our birth certificates with your name on them." "That's not how legal guardianship works," Maxwell explained, his tone automatically shifting to the one he used when explaining complex business matters to new associates. "There would need to be a will, proper documentation filed with—" "There is a will," Ethan interrupted, appearing beside his sister. Unlike Emma, he was still in his rumpled clothes from sleep, his dark hair standing up at odd angles. "Mom had a lawyer. Everything's arranged. He's expecting your call." Maxwell felt a flicker of something like admiration. Margaret had thought of everything, planned for this contingency, with the same thoroughness he applied to his business ventures. "I have an important meeting this morning," Maxwell said, checking his watch again. "But I'll speak with the lawyer afterward and sort this out." "Sort this out," Emma repeated, her voice flat. "Mike, we're a problem to be solved." Maxwell flinched inwardly at her perception, accurate though it was. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," she countered. "We get it. You didn't know about us, and now we're disrupting your perfect billionaire life. But guess what? We didn't ask for this either." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Maxwell saw the grief she'd been masking with defiance. These children had buried their mother yesterday. "I'll reschedule the meeting," he found himself saying, surprising even himself. "We'll go to Brookhaven together. You can show me your home, and I'll speak with the lawyer in person." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, a skill Maxwell found both fascinating and unsettling. "Fine," Ethan finally said, "but we still need to go to school. It's better than sitting around thinking about—" He trailed off. unable to complete the thought. An hour later, Maxwell sat awkwardly in the principal's office of Brookhaven High School, a building he would have normally only seen from the window of his helicopter passing overhead. Principal Winters was explaining the school's bereavement policy while shooting curious glances at Maxwell, clearly recognizing him but too professional to comment. "Emma and Ethan have always been exemplary students," she was saying. "Margaret, Ms. Wilson, was so proud of them. She was also one of our most beloved faculty members. This is a tremendous loss for our school community." Maxwell nodded, feeling like an imposter. These people had known Margaret and his children for years, while he was a stranger who happened to share their DNA. "The twins mentioned you're their father," Principal Winters ventured carefully. "Yes," Maxwell confirmed, the words still foreign on his tongue. "Their mother and I lost touch before I knew about the pregnancy." The principal's expression softened slightly. "Well, they're remarkable young people. Emma is our top student in mathematics and sciences, headed for a bright future in engineering if she continues on her current path. And Ethan has extraordinary talent in creative writing and debate, much like his mother." Her pride, an unexpected emotion, swelled in Maxwell's chest. His children were exceptional, and he'd had nothing to do with it. Margaret had done that all on her own. As he left the school office, his phone rang again. Charlotte Winters, his CFO, for the fourth time that morning. "Maxwell, where are you?" she demanded when he answered. "The Apex team is waiting in the conference room. This acquisition has been in the works for months." "Something's come up," he replied vaguely. "A family matter. I need you to handle it." "Family matter?" Charlotte repeated incredulously. "You don't have family, Max. That's why you work 18-hour days and take calls on Christmas." The truth of her statement stung more than Maxwell would have expected. "Things have changed," he said quietly, watching through the office window as Emma and Ethan disappeared down the school corridor, moving among peers who knew them in ways he never would. Everything has changed. The modest two-story colonial on Maple Street looked nothing like what Maxwell had expected. It was well-maintained but unremarkable. White siding, navy shutters, a small front yard with carefully tended flower beds that were just beginning to bloom. This had been Margaret's home, their children's home. "Mom always said the hydrangeas were the hardest to keep alive," Emma commented, following Maxwell's gaze to the blue blossoms near the porch steps. "But they were her favorite." Maxwell nodded, finding it difficult to speak. He'd sent Margaret flowers exactly once, roses, not hydrangeas, the night of the charity gala where they'd first met. He'd been 28 then, ambitious, but not yet wealthy, determined to make connections with New York's elite. Margaret had been tending bar, working her way through graduate school. She'd laughed at his obvious networking attempts, but slipped him her number anyway. Now, standing before her home, memories he'd long suppressed came flooding back. 6 months they'd been together, the longest relationship he'd maintained before or since, until that final night when she'd mentioned children, a future together, and he'd panicked, seeing only obstacles to his ascent. "Mr. Grant?" A middle-aged man in a tweed jacket approached from the neighboring driveway, interrupting Maxwell's reverie. "I'm Richard Abernathy, Margaret's attorney. We spoke on the phone." Maxwell shook the man's hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. "Thank you for meeting us on such short notice." "Of course. The circumstances are unusual." Abernathy glanced at the twins, who were unlocking the front door. "Shall we go inside?" The interior of the house was modest but warm. Bookshelves lining the walls, family photos everywhere, comfortable furniture showing signs of wear. It couldn't have been more different from Maxwell's sterile penthouse. As the twins disappeared upstairs to change out of their school clothes, Abernathy laid out a folder of documents on the kitchen table. Margaret revised her will 6 months ago when she received the diagnosis, he explained, his voice low. She was very specific about her wishes. The house and her savings are in a trust for Emma and Ethan, to be managed by you until they turn 21. Her life insurance policy is modest, but should cover their college education. Maxwell nodded, scanning the documents. Margaret had been meticulous, planning for every contingency, except one. "What if I'm not equipped for this?" he asked quietly. Abernathy studied him for a long moment. Margaret considered that possibility. "There's a contingency provision. Her sister in Australia would take the children if necessary, though it would mean uprooting them entirely." Maxwell looked up sharply. Margaret had a sister. Half-sister, actually. They weren't close, but Marion agreed to be a backup guardian. Another revelation, another piece of Margaret's life he'd known nothing about. "That won't be necessary," Maxwell said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "They've lost enough already. I won't send them halfway around the world to live with a stranger." Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Margaret believed you would say that. She told me once that beneath your business persona, you were a man of integrity." Maxwell wasn't sure how to respond to that. Had Margaret really held such faith in him, despite his abandonment? Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Ethan's return. He'd changed into jeans and a faded band t-shirt. "The room at the end of the hall was Mom's," he said, his voice tight. "We haven't gone in yet." Maxwell nodded, understanding the unspoken request. Some spaces were still too painful to confront. "There's something else," Abernathy said, producing another envelope from his briefcase. "Margaret left this for you. She asked that I give it to you once you'd agreed to the guardianship." Maxwell took the envelope, noting his name written in the same handwriting as the first letter. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, not ready to read it in front of others. "I'll give you some privacy to discuss arrangements," Abernathy said, gathering his papers. "The legal transfer of guardianship is straightforward. I've prepared all the necessary documents. You'll just need to sign them and file them with family court." After the lawyer left, an awkward silence fell over the kitchen. Maxwell found himself staring at a school photo magnet on the refrigerator. The twins, at perhaps 12 years old, gap-toothed smiles and matching outfits. "She kept everything," Emma said, noticing his focus. "Every report card, every art project, every achievement." "Well, she was proud of you," Maxwell replied. "She was proud of you too, in a weird way," Ethan added, opening the refrigerator and frowning at its meager contents. "Whenever you were in the news, she'd cut out the article." Maxwell turned to him, surprised. "She kept up with my career." Ethan nodded, pulling out a carton of orange juice. "There's a whole box in the attic. The Maxwell Files," she called it. "Whenever we asked about you, she'd show us clippings, tell us how our father was changing the world of business." The revelation struck Maxwell like a physical blow. While he'd completely excised Margaret from his life, she'd made him a presence in their children's lives. "We're going to need groceries," Emma observed, examining the nearly empty refrigerator. "And we should probably figure out sleeping arrangements. Are we staying here, or—" The question hung in the air. Maxwell hadn't thought beyond this moment, hadn't considered the logistics of guardianship. "What would you prefer?" he asked cautiously. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications. "This is our home," Emma said finally. "All our memories of Mom are here." "But your life is in Manhattan," Ethan added pragmatically. "Your company. We don't expect you to move to the suburbs." Maxwell considered the dilemma. His life was indeed in Manhattan, his company, his connections, his entire infrastructure of success. But these children, his children, had just lost their mother. Uprooting them immediately would be cruel. If you've ever had to make a tough choice between your established life and an unexpected new path, subscribe to our channel. The crossroads our protagonist faces might mirror your own journey, that moment when life presents us with second chances we never saw coming. 2 weeks later, Maxwell stood at the window of his Manhattan office, staring unseeingly at the skyline. On his desk, untouched, sat acquisition proposals, quarterly reports, and meeting agendas, all requiring his immediate attention. Yet his mind remained stubbornly fixed on the modest house in Brookhaven, where he now spent his weekends. The arrangement was far from perfect. Monday through Thursday, Maxwell worked from his penthouse, while the twins stayed in their childhood home, looked after by Mrs. Patel, their elderly neighbor, who had gladly stepped in to help during after-school hours. Friday through Sunday, Maxwell drove out to Brookhaven, awkwardly attempting to piece together what parenthood might look like. It was a fragile equilibrium that satisfied no one completely. A knock at his door broke his reverie. Charlotte entered without waiting for a response, a habit she'd developed over years of being his most trusted executive. "The board is getting restless," she said without preamble, placing another folder atop the ignored stack. "The Morgan acquisition is stalled, the Singapore expansion is behind schedule, and you've missed the last 2 investor calls. They're wondering if everything is okay." Maxwell turned from the window. "Everything is fine." Charlotte gave him a skeptical look. "You've been leaving the office by 6 every day. You've declined 3 dinner meetings with potential partners, and you disappeared entirely last weekend." "I had family obligations," Maxwell replied stiffly. "So you keep saying," Charlotte said. "Look, Max, we've worked together for 10 years. Whatever's going on, you can tell me." Maxwell considered his options. The existence of the twins wasn't public knowledge yet, a minor miracle in the age of social media, but it would become so eventually. Charlotte was right. He owed her an explanation. "I have children," he said finally. 16-year-old twins. Their mother died recently, and I've become their guardian." Charlotte's composure, legendary in boardroom crises, finally cracked. "You, what? How is that possible?" "It's a long story," Maxwell sighed. "One I'm still coming to terms with myself." Charlotte sank into a chair, visibly processing this revelation. "Twins," she repeated. "Teenagers. And their mother was someone I knew before I founded Grant Enterprises. We parted ways before I knew she was pregnant." "And now you're their guardian," Charlotte stated, connecting the dots. "That explains the suburban trips. Brookhaven, right? Jenkins mentioned dropping you at the LIRR station." Maxwell nodded, unsurprised that his driver had noticed the change in routine. "So what's your plan?" Charlotte asked, shifting seamlessly into problem-solving mode. "Private school in Manhattan? A nanny for the penthouse?" "They're staying in Brookhaven for now," Maxwell explained. "It's their home, their school, their community. Especially after losing their mother, I can't uproot them immediately." Charlotte studied him with newfound curiosity. "I've never seen this side of you," she observed, "putting someone else's needs before the company's." Her comment stung, though Maxwell recognized its truth. For 2 decades, Grant Enterprises had been his only child, consuming all his attention and energy. "The company will survive my partial attention for a few months," he said, more defensively than intended. "Will it?" Charlotte challenged. "The Moriyama deal is hanging by a thread. They specifically want your personal involvement. Tokyo next week is non-negotiable if we want their partnership." Maxwell had forgotten about the Tokyo trip, a critical meeting with Moriyama Technologies that had been scheduled for months. 5 days in Japan that could secure Grant Enterprises' expansion into Asian markets. "I'll make it work," he said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "How? Will you take your new teenage dependents to Tokyo? Leave them alone in the suburbs?" The question highlighted the impossibility of his situation. He couldn't abandon the twins for nearly a week, not so soon after their mother's death, but he couldn't bring them to Tokyo either, pulling them from school for high-stakes business meetings. "I need to make some calls," Maxwell said. reaching for his phone. After Charlotte left, Maxwell sat at his desk, confronting the first genuine professional dilemma of his career. For 20 years, he'd never hesitated to put business first. Now, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, he found himself unwilling to prioritize a multi-million-dollar deal over two teenagers he barely knew. Before he could second-guess himself, he dialed the twins' school. "This is Maxwell Grant," he said when the secretary answered. "I need to speak with Emma and Ethan Wilson's guidance counselor." 20 minutes later, Maxwell had a clearer picture of his children's academic standing. Both were excellent students, though in different ways. Emma excelled in STEM subjects, already taking advanced placement courses with an eye toward engineering programs. Ethan was more humanities-focused, with particular talent in creative writing and history. Their counselor had been surprised but pleased by Maxwell's interest, mentioning that college applications would begin next year. The thought sent a wave of panic through him. College applications, financial aid forms, campus visits, all milestones he was utterly unprepared to navigate. His next call was to Mrs. Patel, who listened patiently as he explained the Tokyo dilemma. "I would be happy to stay at the house with them," she offered. "They're good children, Mr. Grant. No trouble at all." Maxwell thanked her, relieved, but still unsettled. He'd known these children existed for barely 2 weeks, yet the thought of leaving them, even with a trusted caretaker, felt like a dereliction of duty. His final call was to the twins themselves, catching them just after school. "Tokyo?" Emma repeated when he explained the situation. "For how long?" 5 days, Maxwell replied. "Mrs. Patel will stay with you. I'll call every day and you can reach me anytime." "It's fine," Ethan said, his voice deliberately casual. "We're used to taking care of ourselves." The comment, though not intended as a rebuke, felt like one. These children had grown up self-sufficient out of necessity, with a single mother working full-time. Now, at the first opportunity to prove his reliability, Maxwell was choosing business. "I can try to reschedule," he offered weakly, knowing it was impossible. "Seriously, it's fine," Emma insisted. "We have a history project due anyway, and Ethan has debate team regionals." More aspects of their lives Maxwell knew nothing about. He made a mental note to ask about the history project, the debate topic. After hanging up, Maxwell stared at the Tokyo briefing materials with mixed emotions. He should have felt relieved that the twins were so understanding that his professional obligations could proceed uninterrupted. Instead, he felt a strange emptiness, as if he'd failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. His gaze fell on Margaret's second letter, still unopened in his desk drawer. He'd been avoiding it, fearing what additional revelations it might contain. Now, facing his first major parental decision, he felt compelled to read her final words. With uncharacteristic hesitation, Maxwell opened the envelope and unfolded the letter within. The Tokyo skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moriyama Technologies conference room, but Maxwell barely noticed the spectacular view. His attention was fixed on his phone, where Ethan's text message glowed accusingly. "Emma won't come out of Mom's room. Been in there for hours. Mrs. P tried, but no luck." "Mr. Grant?" Hikaru Moriyama, the silver-haired CEO across the table, cleared his throat pointedly. "Is everything all right?" Maxwell looked up, acutely aware of the 12 executives waiting for his response to their counteroffer. He had been distracted throughout the 3-hour negotiation, checking his phone at every opportunity, his mind constantly drifting to Brookhaven. "My apologies," Maxwell said, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Family emergency." Indeed, the phrase still felt strange on his tongue, but it was becoming increasingly accurate. This was day 3 of his Tokyo trip, and things in Brookhaven were unraveling. First, it had been Ethan's debate team loss, which the boy had downplayed, but which Mrs. Patel reported had left him despondent. Now, something had driven Emma to seek refuge in Margaret's untouched bedroom, a space both twins had avoided since their mother's death. "Perhaps we should reschedule," Moriyama suggested, his tone making it clear what he thought of executives who couldn't remain present for crucial negotiations. "That won't be necessary," Maxwell replied, though everything in him wanted to leave the room, to call the twins directly. "I believe your offer is fair, with one adjustment to the licensing terms." He forced himself through the next hour of negotiations, securing terms that Charlotte would certainly approve of. When signatures were finally exchanged and congratulatory bows completed, Maxwell excused himself immediately, finding a quiet corner of the Moriyama lobby to call Brookhaven. "Mrs. Patel, what happened?" he asked when the neighbor answered. "Emma received a letter today," the older woman explained, "from Wellesley College. She became very upset and locked herself in her mother's room. She won't speak to me or Ethan." "Wellesley," Maxwell repeated, confused. "But she's only 16. It was her mother's alma mater," Mrs. Patel explained. "Margaret always told Emma it was her dream for her daughter to study there too. I believe Emma wrote to them after her mother's passing, and they responded." Maxwell felt a pang of recognition. Another fundamental fact about his children's lives, their mother's education, her hopes for them, that he'd been completely unaware of. "Let me speak with Ethan," he requested. The boy's voice was tense when he came on the line. "She won't even tell me what the letter said," he reported. "Just grabbed it and ran upstairs. I heard her crying." "Has this happened before?" Maxwell asked carefully. "Not really. Emma's usually the steady one." The admission seemed to cost Ethan something. Maxwell sensed the twins relied heavily on each other, with Emma typically the emotional anchor. "I'm coming home," Maxwell decided aloud, the words forming before he'd consciously made the decision. "I'll be on the next flight." "What? You're in Tokyo. You can't just—" "I'll be there by tomorrow," Maxwell interrupted. "Tell Emma to hang on. Tell her I'm coming." After hanging up, Maxwell called his assistant, instructing her to book the next available flight to New York. Then he called Charlotte. "The Moriyama deal is done," he reported without preamble. "I'm coming back tonight." "Tonight?" Charlotte echoed, surprised. "But you have the Sony meeting tomorrow, and the tour of the Osaka facility. You'll have to handle those," Maxwell interrupted. "The twins need me." There was a brief silence on the line. "This is really happening, isn't it?" Charlotte finally said. "You're actually choosing family over business." "It appears so," Maxwell replied, somewhat surprised himself. 18 hours later, Maxwell's town car pulled into the driveway of the Brookhaven house. The journey, a hastily arranged commercial flight, a sprint through customs, the long drive from JFK, had left him exhausted, but adrenaline kept him alert as he approached the front door. Mrs. Patel answered his knock, relief evident in her expression. "Thank goodness you're here," she said. "Emma still hasn't come down. I've left food outside the door, but I don't think she's eating." Maxwell nodded his thanks to the neighbor, then climbed the stairs to the second floor. The door at the end of the hall, Margaret's room, remained firmly closed. He knocked gently. "Emma? It's Maxwell." Silence. "I know something's wrong," he continued, feeling awkward and completely out of his depth. "I'd like to help, if I can." More silence, then the soft sound of movement. The door opened a crack, revealing Emma's face, blotchy from crying, her eyes red-rimmed and wary. "You came back early," she stated, her voice hoarse. "Of course I did," Maxwell replied, though nothing about his decision had felt like "of course" at the time. He'd broken a cardinal rule of business: never abandon a deal mid-negotiation. For these children he barely knew. Emma studied him for a moment, then opened the door wider, allowing him to see into the room. It was exactly as Margaret had left it, feminine without being frilly, bookshelves lining one wall, a cozy reading chair by the window, family photos on the dresser. Emma had been sitting on the bed, surrounded by papers and a small wooden box. "What happened?" Maxwell asked gently, remaining in the doorway. Emma held up a letter with the Wellesley College letterhead. "Mom always wanted me to go there," she said. "She said she'd been saving for it my whole life, that it was her dream for me." Maxwell nodded, waiting for her to continue. "So I wrote to them," Emma said, her voice breaking. "After she died, I told them about her, how she was an alumna, how she'd raised us alone. I asked about early admission programs, scholarships, anything that might help me fulfill her wish." She thrust the letter toward Maxwell. "They were very nice, very sympathetic. They told me about their alumni legacy program and sent information about financial aid. But it won't matter." Maxwell scanned the letter, seeing nothing that would cause such distress. "I don't understand. This seems positive." "I found Mom's financial records," Emma explained, gesturing to the papers on the bed. "She was behind on the mortgage. The life insurance barely covers that and her medical bills. There's nothing left for college. Nothing." Understanding dawned. "Emma, she sacrificed everything for us," Emma continued, tears flowing freely now. "Worked extra jobs, never bought anything for herself. And it still wasn't enough. I can't even fulfill her one wish." "Emma," Maxwell said more firmly, "I'm a billionaire." The girl looked up, momentarily confused through her griefs. "College tuition isn't a concern," Maxwell continued, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "Wellesley, Harvard, MIT, wherever you want to go, for both you and Ethan. That's not something you need to worry about." Emma stared at him, processing this information. "But these are Mom's records," she said finally, gesturing to the papers. "Her plans for us. It feels wrong to just discard them because you have money." The statement cut deeper than Emma could have known. It crystallized something Maxwell had been feeling since discovering the twins. That Margaret had been the real parent, making sacrifices and plans while he'd been absent, contributing nothing but DNA. "You're right," he acknowledged, taking a tentative step into the room, into Margaret's space. "Your mother did everything. She made all the hard choices, all the sacrifices. I contributed nothing." "That's not what I meant," Emma began, but Maxwell shook his head. "It's the truth," he said simply, "but I'm here now. And while I can't replace your mother, or make up for 16 years of absence, I can ensure that her dreams for you are fulfilled." He sat cautiously on the edge of the bed, looking at the scattered papers, Margaret's careful budget calculations, college brochures, scholarship information, her meticulous planning for children he hadn't even known existed. "Tell me about her," he said suddenly. "Tell me who Margaret was as a mother." The request seemed to surprise Emma, but after a moment she began to speak. Stories flowed. Margaret helping with science fair projects, reading bedtime stories long after they could read themselves, working night shifts to pay for summer camps, celebrating small victories with impromptu dance parties in the kitchen. As Emma spoke, Maxwell listened intently, piecing together the life of the woman he'd once known and the mother she'd become. For the first time, he began to understand what he'd truly missed. Not just watching his children grow, but witnessing Margaret's transformation into the extraordinary parent she'd clearly been. In that moment, sitting in Margaret's room, surrounded by evidence of her devotion, Maxwell Grant made a silent promise. Not to replace her, which would be impossible, but to become worthy of being these children's father. Rain lashed against the windows of Maxwell's Manhattan office as he stared at the document before him. The Grant Family Trust, freshly drafted by his attorneys, awaiting only his signature. Its provisions were comprehensive. full college funding for the twins, ownership of Margaret's house transferred to them, a substantial monthly allowance, and significant inheritance upon his death or their 30th birthdays, whichever came first. On paper, it ensured the twins would never want for anything materially, yet as Maxwell reviewed the clinical legal language, he felt a hollow dissatisfaction. Money was the easy part, something he could provide without personal inconvenience or emotional investment. Or what the twins truly needed, guidance, stability, a parent's presence, required something far more challenging than his signature on a trust document. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Grant, your 3 o'clock is here." "Send him in," Maxwell replied, slipping the trust documents into a folder. The door opened to reveal not his expected appointment, but Ethan, soaking wet from the rain, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Ethan?" Maxwell stood, surprised. "Is everything all right? Where's Emma?" "At debate team practice," Ethan replied, water dripping from his dark hair onto the marble floor. "I took the train in. Your assistant didn't seem happy about it." "She's not used to teenagers appearing unannounced," Maxwell said, grabbing a throw from his office sofa and offering it to the boy. "How did you even get past building security?" Ethan shrugged, accepting the throw. "I told them I was your son, showed them my school ID with our last name. The security guy called up, and your assistant said to send me to wait in reception, but I convinced the elevator operator I knew where I was going." Maxwell made a mental note to review building security protocols, also to have a word with his assistant about the appropriate response when family members arrived. Family members. The phrase still felt foreign. "So," Maxwell said, gesturing for Ethan to sit, "what brings you to Manhattan on a school day?" Ethan dropped into the chair across from Maxwell's desk, his expression unreadable. "We got our English assignments today. Family narratives. We're supposed to interview family members about their lives." The implication hung in the air between them. Maxwell was, technically, the only family member the twins had left. "I see," Maxwell said carefully. "And Emma?" "She says she's writing about Mom," Ethan replied, "that she has enough memories for both of us, but I wanted—" He trailed off, suddenly looking every bit his 16 years, uncertain and vulnerable. "You wanted to know about me," Maxwell finished for him. Ethan nodded, pulling a slightly damp notebook from his backpack. "If that's okay." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, momentarily at a loss. In his 20 years as a CEO, he'd given countless interviews about his business philosophy, his market predictions, his strategic vision. Never once had he been asked about himself as a person, his childhood, his dreams, his regrets. "Where would you like to start?" he asked finally. "The beginning, I guess," Ethan said, pen poised above the notebook. "Where did you grow up? What were your parents like?" Simple questions that opened onto complex territory. Maxwell hesitated, then made a decision. Reaching for his phone, he canceled his remaining appointments for the day. "This might take a while," he explained to Ethan's surprised expression, "and I think we could both use something warm to drink." After ordering hot chocolate for Ethan and coffee for himself, Maxwell began to speak. The words came haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency as he described his childhood in a small Ohio town, the son of a factory worker and a nurse. "We weren't poor, exactly," he explained, "but money was always tight. My father worked second shift at the steel plant, came home with hands so rough they felt like sandpaper. My mother picked up extra hospital shifts whenever she could." "Like Mom did," Ethan observed quietly. "Extra jobs, I mean." Maxwell nodded, struck by the parallel he hadn't considered before. "My parents had dreams for me. College, a professional career, stability they never had. When I got into Penn on scholarship, it was the proudest day of their lives." "They must be proud of you now," Ethan said. "Billionaire CEO and all that." Maxwell's expression clouded. They died in a car accident my sophomore year of college. Black ice on a back road. They never saw any of this. Ethan looked up sharply. You were orphaned? At 20? Yes, Maxwell confirmed, surprised by Ethan's focus on this detail. I finished school on loans and scholarships, worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. So you know, Ethan said, his voice suddenly intense, what it's like to lose your parents. The connection landed like a physical blow. Of course, the twins had just lost their only parent, or so they believed. And here was Maxwell, who had experienced similar loss at a comparable age. It changes you, Maxwell acknowledged. Makes you self-reliant, perhaps too much so. Is that why you've never married, never had a family? I mean, that you knew about? The question was direct, bordering on accusatory, but Maxwell recognized it as crucial. Partly, he admitted. After my parents died, I built walls, focused on what I could control: education, career, wealth accumulation. Relationships seemed unpredictable, risky. Until our mom, Ethan prompted. Maxwell nodded, memories of Margaret flooding back. She was different, challenged me, made me laugh. For a while she got past my defenses. But not enough to stay, Ethan observed, his tone carefully neutral. That was my failure, not hers, Maxwell said firmly. I was young, ambitious, terrified of anything that might divert me from my paths. When she talked about a future together, possibly children someday, I panicked. And now you have us anyway, Ethan said with a hint of irony. Surprise! Despite the tension of the moment, Maxwell found himself smiling. A surprise I never deserved, but am nonetheless grateful for. Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly at this admission. He jotted something in his notebook, then asked, When did you know you wanted to be a businessman? The question shifted them to safer ground, and Maxwell relaxed slightly, describing his fascination with markets, his early entrepreneurial ventures in college, the startup he launched after graduation, that eventually evolved into Grant Enterprises. As the rain continued to hammer against the windows, their conversation flowed more naturally. Ethan proved to be a thoughtful interviewer, asking perceptive questions that revealed his intelligence and emotional insight. Maxwell found himself sharing stories he hadn't recalled in years. His first failed venture, the investor who took a chance on him, the all-nighters pulled to meet impossible deadlines. You never gave up, Ethan observed, even when things looked impossible. Persistence is essential, Maxwell agreed. In business and in life. Is that what you're doing with us? Ethan asked abruptly. Persisting, even though it's complicated and inconvenient? The question caught Maxwell off guard with its bluntness. Is that how you see it? As an inconvenience I'm tolerating? Ethan shrugged, suddenly interested in his empty hot chocolate mug. You had a life all set up. Successful company, Manhattan penthouse, global deals. Then suddenly, bam, teenage dependence you never asked for. That's one way to look at it, Maxwell acknowledged. Here's another. I had a successful company, yes. A penthouse filled with expensive objects that meant nothing to me. Deals that consumed my time, but left me empty. Then suddenly, unexpectedly, I discovered I had children. A connection to someone I once cared deeply for. A chance at something I'd written off long ago. A family. Ethan looked up, clearly surprised by this perspective. I'm not persisting despite the complications, Maxwell continued. I'm persisting because of them, because difficult things are often the most worthwhile. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, skepticism giving way to cautious hope. My English teacher says that's what makes a good story. Characters who change, who discover what they really want, isn't what they thought they wanted. Your English teacher sounds wise, Maxwell replied. Though I should point out, this isn't just a story for me. It's my life now, our lives. Ethan nodded slowly. So what happens next? in our story? It was the question Maxwell had been asking himself for weeks. The temporary arrangement, weekdays in Brookhaven with Mrs. Patel, weekends with Maxwell, was unsustainable. The twins needed stability, consistency, and despite his initial reluctance, Maxwell was finding that he needed them too, their questions, their perspectives, even their challenges to his orderly existence. "I think it's time for a change," Maxwell said, the idea crystallizing as he spoke. "The commuting arrangement isn't working. You and Emma need a permanent home, with a parent present." Ethan tensed. "You're moving us to Manhattan?" "No," Maxwell replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm moving to Brookhaven." Ethan stared at him, clearly stunned. "But your company can be run from anywhere, at least part of the time," Maxwell said, the plan forming rapidly now. "I'll convert the home office at the house, commute into the city 3 days a week. The rest of the time I'll work remotely." "You'd do that?" Ethan asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "Leave your penthouse, your fancy lifestyle? For my children?" "Yes," Maxwell said simply, the truth of it resonating through him. "I've missed 16 years. I'm not missing any more." The magnitude of this decision, its implications for his business, his executive team, his board of directors, would require careful navigation. But looking at Ethan's face, seeing the flicker of hope there, Maxwell knew it was the only possible choice. In that moment, his phone rang, the special tone reserved for his highest priority contacts. Maxwell glanced at the screen. Charlotte, lightly calling about the Moriyama contract finalization. For the first time in his professional life, Maxwell Grant hit decline on a priority call without a second thought. The headline on Bloomberg News read, "Grant Enterprises CEO shocks board with suburban relocation." The New York Times business section was more cutting. "Billionaire abandons Manhattan, midlife crisis or strategic retreat." The Wall Street Journal had been the most charitable. "Grant pivots to hybrid leadership model, challenging corporate norms." Maxwell closed his tablet, setting it aside as he stood in what had once been Margaret's bedroom and was now his own. The renovations to the Brookhaven house had been minimal but significant. The home office expanded and equipped with state-of-the-art technology, the kitchen updated, the twins' rooms refreshed according to their preferences. Margaret's room had been the last to change, and even now, 3 months after his decision to relocate, Maxwell maintained elements of her presence. The bookshelves she'd loved, the reading chair by the window, a few photographs he'd found particularly moving. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, straightening his tie. Emma appeared in the doorway, dressed for school in jeans and a Brookhaven high sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The resemblance to Margaret still struck him at unexpected moments. "Your car's here," she informed him, "and Ethan's hogging the bathroom, as usual." Maxwell nodded, checking his watch. "Board meeting at 9. I should be back by dinner." These mundane exchanges had become their new normal. The fabric of family life, slowly weaving itself through days of shared meals, school drop-offs, weekend activities, and the occasional crisis. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences and uncertain boundaries, but it was, undeniably, a family taking shape. "Good luck with the presentation," Emma added, lingering in the doorway. "The board still giving you trouble?" Maxwell smiled faintly. The twins had become surprisingly attuned to his professional challenges, asking astute questions about business dynamics that often provided fresh perspectives. "Some members are still adjusting to our new arrangement," he acknowledged. Today's meeting would be particularly tense. The quarterly results had exceeded projections, yet several board members continued to express concerns about his divided focus. "They'll come around," Emma said with unexpected confidence. "The numbers don't lie." "From your lips to the board's ears," Maxwell replied, picking up his briefcase. Downstairs, they found Ethan in the kitchen, hastily assembling a sandwich for his lunch. Debate team has regionals this weekend, he reminded them through a mouthful of cereal. Coach says we need parent drivers. Maxwell mentally reviewed his calendar. I'll make it work. I'll drive myself, Emma said. I've got robotics lab until 5 anyway. And these mundane logistics, the choreography of after-school activities, meal planning, and transportation had become Maxwell's most unexpected challenge. Running a multinational corporation seemed straightforward compared to the intricate scheduling demands of teenage lives. The sound of a car horn drew their attention. That's your ride, Ethan noted. Jenkins is getting impatient. He's not used to suburban pickup schedules, Maxwell replied, gathering his things. At the door, he hesitated, still awkward with farewells. Have a good day. Text me if you need anything. It wasn't, I love you. None of them were ready for such declarations. But it was genuine concern, a promise of availability that meant more than the words themselves conveyed. As the town car pulled away from the modest colonial house, Maxwell allowed himself a moment of reflection. 3 months ago, his morning routine had been rigidly efficient. A solitary breakfast while reviewing market reports, a silent elevator ride to his waiting car, uninterrupted strategy planning during his commute. Now, his mornings were chaotic, noisy, and frequently running behind schedule. Yet he couldn't deny the strange satisfaction he derived from this messier existence. Different route today, sir? Jenkins asked, interrupting his thoughts. No, why? You're smiling, his driver observed. Usually means you're thinking about something other than the office. Maxwell hadn't realized his expression had changed. Just family matters, he replied vaguely. The Grant Enterprises headquarters loomed ahead, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that Maxwell had once considered his true home. Now, it was merely his workplace, a significant distinction that his executive team was still struggling to accept. Charlotte was waiting in the lobby, tablet in hand, her expression carefully neutral as she fell into step beside him. The board's already assembled, she reported as they entered the private elevator. Hendricks and Zhao have submitted their proxy votes against the Asia expansion delay. As expected, Maxwell replied calmly. The rest? On the fence. They want to hear your justification directly. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Maxwell felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied corporate combat. This, at least, remained unchanged. His strategic instincts, his command of the boardroom, his absolute confidence in his business decisions. The meeting proceeded much as he'd anticipated. The quarterly results were strong enough to mute the most strident criticisms, but pointed questions about his commitment and priorities still emerged, thinly veiled references to his family situation. Gentlemen, ladies, Maxwell said finally, after 2 hours of debate, let me be perfectly clear. Grant Enterprises has outperformed market projections for the 3rd consecutive quarter under our current leadership model. Our Asia expansion is proceeding methodically, with appropriate due diligence rather than reckless haste. And most importantly, he paused, meeting each board member's gaze directly. My personal arrangements have not and will not negatively impact this company's performance. With all due respect, Maxwell, Vernon Hendricks, his most vocal critic, interjected, your personal arrangements, as you call them, represent a fundamental shift in your approach. For 20 years, you've been singularly focused on this company. Now suddenly you're playing suburban father to teenagers you just met? The room fell silent, the question crossing a boundary that even the boldest board members had previously respected. Maxwell felt a flash of anger, quickly controlled. My children, he said evenly, emphasizing the word, are not a topic for boardroom discussion, Vernon. My leadership of this company, however, certainly is. So let me address that directly. He stood, buttoning his jacket, a subtle power move he'd employed countless times in tense negotiations. For 2 decades, I've given everything to Grant Enterprises, every waking hour, every ounce of creative energy, every personal sacrifice required. The results speak for themselves. Maxwell gestured to the quarterly report displayed on the screens around the room. But I've come to understand something about sustainability. A leader who brings nothing but work to the table eventually becomes stale, predictable, limited by their own narrowing perspective. He moved around the table slowly, making eye contact with each member as he continued. What I'm bringing to this company now is something new. A broader view, a different set of priorities, a fresh understanding of what we're building for and why. If anything, that makes me a more effective CEO, not less. Charlotte, watching from the corner, suppressed a smile. This was Maxwell Grant, at his most persuasive, confident without arrogance, passionate without emotionalism, utterly commanding. The numbers support my position, Maxwell concluded, returning to his seat. But if the board disagrees, you have options. You can vote to remove me. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. I serve at your pleasure. However, his voice hardened slightly. I should remind you that I remain the majority shareholder, and my vision for this company's future has proven remarkably profitable for everyone in this room. The silence that followed was broken by Lakshmi Patel, the board's eldest member, who rarely spoke but carried enormous influence. I believe, she said thoughtfully, that we are witnessing the evolution of a good CEO into a great one. A man with perspective is worth 10 men with merely ambition. From there, the tide turned. The expansion delay was approved, Maxwell's leadership affirmed, and the meeting adjourned with tentative harmony restored. As the board members filed out, Charlotte approached, an approving expression on her face. Well played, she murmured, though I suspect Hendricks will continue to be a problem. Hendricks has always been a problem, Maxwell replied. That's why I keep him on the board. He prevents complacency. Charlotte laughed softly. The old Maxwell would have crushed him for that personal comment about the twins. The old Maxwell would have, he agreed. The new one realizes that opponents are most dangerous when they're feeling cornered. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How'd it go? Board still being jerks? Maxwell smiled, typing back. Board managed. Coming home early. Need anything from the city? The exchange was simple, but it represented something profound. A teenager checking on her father's workday, a father adjusting his schedule to be more present. You really have changed, Charlotte observed, watching this interaction. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have looked at your phone during transition time between meetings. 6 months ago, no one would have been texting me except about business emergencies, Maxwell countered. Are you happier? Charlotte asked suddenly, the directness of the question surprising them both. Maxwell considered this as they walked toward his office. Happiness had never been a metric he'd applied to his life before. Success, achievement, growth. These were his measurements of a life well lived. I'm more, he finally answered. More engaged, more challenged, more... He searched for the right word. Human. Charlotte nodded, understanding. I need to head back to Brookhaven, Maxwell said, checking his watch. Ethan has debate team regionals this weekend. Apparently, I'm driving. CEO as chauffeur, Charlotte remarked with a smile. The board would have a collective aneurysm. What the board doesn't know won't hurt them, Maxwell replied, gathering his things. Send me the Nakamura proposal to review tonight. I'll look at it after the kids are asleep. Mran. As his town car pulled away from the towering Grant Enterprises headquarters, Maxwell found himself genuinely eager to return to the modest house in the suburbs. A sentiment that would have been unthinkable just months ago. The suburban anonymity he'd initially dreaded had become oddly liberating. In Brookhaven, he wasn't the billionaire CEO whose every move was scrutinized by the business press. He was simply Mr. Grant, father of twins, the new neighbor who still forgot trash day occasionally. Jenkins took the familiar route toward the Long Island Expressway, navigating through Manhattan traffic with practiced ease. "Making good time today, sir," he commented. "Should have you home by 4. Home. The word no longer evoked images of his sterile penthouse, but rather the warm chaos of the Brookhaven house. Emma's textbooks scattered across the dining table, Ethan's perpetually unmade bed, the refrigerator covered with school schedules and takeout menus. Maxwell's phone rang, Ethan's ringtone. He answered immediately, a reflexive response that had developed with surprising speed. "Dad?" Ethan's voice came through the speakers, slightly breathless. It was still new, this form of address. Dad instead of Maxwell, tentatively adopted by both twins in recent weeks. Each time he heard it, Maxwell felt a strange tightening in his chest. "What's wrong?" he asked, instantly alert to the tension in his son's voice. "Nothing's wrong exactly," Ethan replied. "It's just, could you maybe stop somewhere on your way home? I need help with something for tomorrow. A suit. For the debate competition." "A suit," Maxwell repeated, already mentally cataloging options. "Brooks Brothers is still open. We could stop there." "That sounds expensive," Ethan said hesitantly. "Maybe somewhere more normal?" Normal. Another concept Maxwell was still calibrating in his new life. "I'll figure something out," he assured his son. "See you soon." As he hung up, Maxwell caught Jenkins watching him in the rearview mirror, a faint smile on the driver's face. "What?" Maxwell asked. "Nothing, sir," Jenkins replied. "It's just, it suits you, fatherhood." Maxwell leaned back, letting the observation settle over him. Perhaps it did suit him, this role he'd never sought nor expected. Perhaps, in some cosmic rebalancing, it was always meant to be his. "Take the next exit," he instructed Jenkins. "We need to find a department store, something normal." The auditorium of Brookhaven High School buzzed with nervous energy as parents and students filed in for the regional debate championship finals. Maxwell sat in the third row, program in hand, watching as Ethan and his teammates huddled in intense last-minute preparation at the side of the stage. His son looked almost unrecognizable in the charcoal suit they'd purchased the previous day, suddenly older, more serious, a glimpse of the man he was becoming. "He looks nervous," Emma observed, settling into the seat beside Maxwell. She'd insisted on coming straight from her robotics lab, still wearing safety goggles pushed up on her head like a headband. "He'll be fine once he starts," Maxwell replied with more confidence than he felt. In truth, he had no idea how Ethan would perform. This was the first debate competition he'd been able to attend, and the magnitude of what he'd missed during his children's formative years struck him anew. "Mom always said he gets like this before debates," Emma continued, "all quiet and intense. Then he transforms on stage. Her word, not mine. She said he reminded her of you that way." Maxwell turned to her, surprised. "She said that? That he reminds her of me?" Emma nodded, fiddling with her program. "She used to tell us stories about you sometimes. How you could command a room, make people believe in your vision, even when it seemed impossible. The revelation that Margaret had spoken of him to their children, not with bitterness but with something like admiration, settled over Maxwell like a warm weight. "Did she tell you why we separated?" he asked carefully. Emma kept her eyes on the stage. "She said you had different dreams, that you wanted a family, roots, stability, and you wanted to change the world, build something extraordinary." "That's a generous interpretation," Maxwell admitted. "Was she wrong?" "No," he said after a moment, "but she left out the part where I was young and foolish and terrified of failure, where I convinced myself I had to choose between success and family, that I couldn't possibly have both." Emma considered this. "And now?" Now I know better, Maxwell replied simply. Too late for your mother, but hopefully not too late for you and Ethan. Before Emma could respond, the lights dimmed and the debate moderator approached the microphone. The championship round was about to begin. Maxwell watched with growing appreciation as the debate unfolded. The topic was complex: environmental regulations versus economic growth in developing nations. And Ethan's team was arguing the more difficult position, advocating for balanced regulation that protected both indigenous resources and economic opportunity. When Ethan's turn came, Maxwell leaned forward unconsciously, suddenly anxious. His son approached the podium with the careful formality of someone wearing a new suit, adjusted the microphone, and then seemed to transform, just as Margaret had described. His voice strengthened, his gestures became confident, his arguments flowed with persuasive clarity. He cited economic data Maxwell himself had reviewed in board meetings, referenced case studies from emerging markets, and concluded with a passionate appeal for ethical stewardship that incorporated both human needs and environmental concerns. "He's amazing," Maxwell whispered to Emma, genuine awe in his voice. She smiled, unsurprised. "He won state last year. Mom was so proud." Another milestone missed. Another celebration he should have shared. The familiar pang of regret threatened to overshadow the moment, but Maxwell pushed it aside, focusing instead on the present, his son's eloquence, his daughter's quiet pride, his own overwhelming gratitude to be here now, witnessing this. When Brookhaven was announced as the regional champion, Maxwell found himself on his feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that would have shocked his board members. Ethan's teammates surrounded him in celebration, but over their shoulders, the boy's eyes found his father's. The smile they exchanged transcended the awkwardness that sometimes still lingered between them, a moment of pure connection, of shared accomplishment. After the ceremony, as they walked through the parking lot toward Maxwell's car, Ethan remained animated, replaying key moments of the debate, while Emma teased him good-naturedly about his newfound sartorial elegance. "The suit worked," Ethan insisted. "Psychology of persuasion. Appearance affects credibility. I'm pretty sure it was your argument that won, not the Brooks brothers," Emma countered. "Both helped," Maxwell offered diplomatically. "Presentation matters, but substance prevails." "Spoken like a true CEO," Emma said, rolling her eyes but smiling. "And debate champion father," Ethan added, the words casual but significant. Maxwell felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Very proud." As they reached the car, his phone buzzed. The display showed Charlotte's name, unusual for a Saturday evening. Maxwell hesitated, finger hovering over the screen. "Take it," Ethan said, noticing his hesitation. "We can wait." A few months ago, Maxwell wouldn't have paused before answering. Now, he deliberately pressed decline. "It can wait until Monday," he decided. "Tonight is for celebrating. Where should we go for dinner?" The twins exchanged surprised glances at this unprecedented prioritization. "Salvatore's," Emma suggested, naming the local Italian restaurant that had become a family favorite. Maxwell nodded, unlocking the car. "Perfect." Later that evening, after pasta and too much tiramisu, after Ethan had recounted every moment of the debate to an enthusiastic Salvatore himself, who turned out to be a former Brookhaven High parent, after Emma had finally removed her safety goggles and both twins had retreated to their rooms, Maxwell found himself alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet, settled into the comfortable silence of a home where people were sleeping securely. He poured himself a small scotch, the one luxury he'd maintained from his previous life, and moved to the back porch, where Margaret had installed a pair of Adirondack chairs overlooking the modest garden. Sitting in one, he finally checked the message from Charlotte. It wasn't about business at all. "Thought you'd want to see this," the text read, with a link to a Wall Street Journal article. The headline made him smile. Grant's gamble pays off. CEO's family focus drives record quarter. The article analyzed what they were calling the Grant method, hybrid leadership that balanced personal fulfillment with professional excellence, questioning the traditionally accepted sacrifice of family for corporate success. His board's initial skepticism had given way to cautious endorsement as the company's performance continued to strengthen under his new arrangement. Maxwell closed the article, setting his phone aside to stare up at the suburban night sky, less impressive than the Manhattan view from his penthouse, but somehow more peaceful. The financial validation was gratifying, but it wasn't what mattered most to him now. His thoughts drifted to Margaret's second letter, which he'd read countless times since that day in the office. "I'm not asking you to love them immediately," she'd written. "I'm asking you to give them a chance. Give yourself a chance at the life you dismissed so easily all those years ago." Maxwell hadn't understood then what she meant by giving himself a chance. He'd approached guardianship as a responsibility, a duty to fulfill. What he hadn't expected was how profoundly the twins would change him, how Emma's brilliant, practical mind would challenge his thinking, how Ethan's emotional intelligence would open doors within himself he'd long kept sealed. He hadn't expected to find joy in the mundane rhythms of family life: Saturday morning pancakes, school pickup conversations, debates about movie choices, even arguments about curfews and appropriate social media use. The parts of parenting he'd assumed would be burdensome had instead become anchoring points in a life that had previously been defined solely by professional achievement. A soft creak of the screen door interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood there, wrapped in an old cardigan that had likely been Margaret's. "Can't sleep?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. She shook her head, settling into it. "I was thinking about Mom." Maxwell nodded, understanding. These moments came for both twins, sudden waves of grief breaking through their daily routines, memories triggered by small things, ordinary moments when Margaret's absence became unbearably present. "What about her?" he asked gently. "She would have loved tonight," Emma said. "Ethan winning, all of us at Salvatore's, especially you being there, being part of it." Maxwell considered this. "Do you think she knew? When she wrote that letter, when she made me your guardian, do you think she knew this would happen?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I think she hoped," she said finally. Mom was always hoping for things. She called it practical optimism, planning for reality, but leaving room for magic. Practical optimism," Maxwell repeated, liking the phrase. It captured something essential about Margaret, the quality that had drawn him to her initially. Her clear-eyed practicality combined with an unexpected capacity for dreams. "She kept your photos," Emma continued quietly, "not just the newspaper clippings, personal ones from when you were together. She had them in a box in her closet. Ethan and I found them afterward." Maxwell felt his throat tighten. "What kind of photos?" "You both looked really young, happy. There was one on a ferry, you were laughing and the wind was blowing her hair. She wrote on the back, 'The day I knew.'" "Knew what?" Maxwell asked, though he suspected the answer. Emma shrugged, pulling the cardigan tighter around herself. "She never said. But I think she never really stopped loving you in some way, even though she built a whole life without you." The words hung in the night air between them. Maxwell thought of all the choices that had led to this moment: his youthful fear, Margaret's courage, the parallel lives they'd lived, separate but somehow still connected through the twins. "I wish I could tell her," he began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the complex tangle of regret, gratitude, and belated understanding he felt. "She knew," Emma said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not everything, but enough. She wouldn't have chosen you as our guardian otherwise." Maxwell nodded, accepting this generosity of interpretation. Whether Margaret had truly understood the man he would become, or simply taken a leap of faith based on the man she'd once known, he would never be able to ask her. What mattered was honoring her choice, her trust, by being the father their children deserved. "We did okay today, didn't we?" he asked, after a comfortable silence had settled between them. "As a family," Emma smiled, the expression transforming her serious face, making her look suddenly younger. "Yeah," she agreed. "We did okay." It wasn't a declaration of perfect resolution, of wounds completely healed or challenges overcome. It was something more honest, an acknowledgement of progress, of genuine effort, of a path being walked together despite its unexpected beginnings. For Maxwell Grant, who had built his business on grand visions and absolute certainties, this modest assessment, "We did okay," felt like the most meaningful success of his life. 1 year later, Maxwell stood in the garden behind the Brookhaven house, surveying the transformation. What had once been Margaret's modest flower beds had expanded into a true family project. Emma's precisely calculated vegetable grid on one side, Ethan's more haphazard herb garden on the other, Maxwell's experimental rose bushes along the fence. Like their lives together, it was a blend of individual expressions within a shared space, sometimes messy but undeniably flourishing. "Dad, where did you put the extra string lights?" Emma called from the patio, where she was methodically arranging tables and chairs. "Check the garage, second shelves," he called back, still marveling at how easily the title now flowed between them. Dad, father. No longer awkward designations, but comfortable identities, worn smooth through daily use. Today marked the anniversary of Margaret's passing, a day they had collectively decided should be commemorative rather than solely mournful. Celebration of life, Emma had called it, organizing a gathering of Margaret's friends, colleagues, former students, and neighbors. Mom wouldn't want us sitting around being sad, she'd insisted. She'd want stories and laughter, and maybe a little too much wine. Maxwell smiled at the accuracy of this assessment. Even in their brief time together, Margaret's approach to life had been wholehearted, her capacity for joy undimmed by practical challenges. It was a quality he now recognized in both twins, Ethan's passionate engagement with ideas, Emma's fierce dedication to her pursuits, and perhaps, if he was honest, something he was slowly reclaiming in himself. The doorbell rang, signaling the first arrivals. Maxwell checked his watch, right on time, as the invitation had specified 3 o'clock. He made his way through the house, passing Ethan in the kitchen arranging a formidable array of appetizers. "Need help?" Maxwell offered. Ethan shook his head. "Got it covered, but could you grab Mom's photo album from the living room? Mrs. Patel was asking about it." Maxwell nodded, detouring to collect the well-worn album from its place of honor on the bookshelves. In the year since he'd moved to Brookhaven, the interior of the house had evolved to reflect their blended lives. Margaret's warmth preserved in key elements, Maxwell's more modern sensibilities integrated thoughtfully, the twins' expanding interests evident throughout. Opening the door, Maxwell welcomed the first guests, teachers from Brookhaven High, bearing casseroles and fond memories of their colleague. Soon the house filled with people, each carrying stories of Margaret. As a dedicated teacher, a loyal friend, a passionate advocate for literacy programs, a loving mother, Maxwell moved among them, sometimes participating, sometimes simply observing as the twins shared memories and received condolences that had evolved into genuine affection and support. These people, this community, had become part of his life too, so different from the rarefied circles he'd once inhabited exclusively. "Quite a gathering," a voice observed beside him. Maxwell turned to find Richard Abernathy, Margaret's attorney, holding a glass of lemonade and surveying the crowd. "Margaret touched many lives," Maxwell replied. Abernathy nodded thoughtfully. She would be pleased, I think, not just with this, he gestured to the gathering, but with how things have turned out. With you. Maxwell considered this. I hope so. I've tried to honor her wishes, to be the guardian she believed I could be. More than that, Abernathy said, you've become a father. There's a difference. The distinction resonated with Maxwell. Guardian had been his initial role, a legal designation, a responsibility accepted. Father was what he had become through daily choices, small moments, gradual trust built and maintained. I never asked, Maxwell said suddenly. But why did Margaret choose me? She must have known how unprepared I was, how completely I'd separated myself from family life. Abernathy smiled slightly. I asked her the same question when she revised her will. She said something I remembered. He values excellence in everything he touches. Once he recognizes these children as his, he'll want to excel at fatherhood too. It's in his nature. The insight struck Maxwell deeply. Margaret had understood something fundamental about him, had gambled their children's future on this core aspect of his character. She was wiser than I deserved, he admitted. Perhaps, Abernathy agreed, or perhaps she simply saw what you were capable of becoming, given the right motivation. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma calling everyone to the backyard for a toast. The guests migrated through the house to the garden, where twinkling lights now illuminated the gathering dusk, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere despite the dozens of people present. Ethan stood on the small deck, uncharacteristically nervous as he raised a glass. Thank you all for coming, he began, for sharing your memories of our mom and for supporting us this past year. Emma joined him, continuing seamlessly where he left off, their twin connection evident in these moments of emotional significance. Mom always said that grief is really just love, with nowhere to go. Today is about giving that love somewhere to go, into stories, into laughter, into community, into family, Ethan added, his gaze finding Maxwell's in the crowd. Old and new. Maxwell felt a swell of emotion as the twins proceeded to share favorite memories of their mother, their voices sometimes breaking, but always finding strength in each other. They had grown so much in the past year, not just physically, but in confidence, in resilience, in their capacity to hold both grief and joy. As the formal part of the ceremony concluded and guests returned to smaller conversations, Maxwell found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the garden where Margaret had planted hydrangeas, her favorites, Emma had once mentioned. They were blooming magnificently now, their blue heads nodding in the gentle evening breeze. Those were always stubborn, a woman's voice observed, approaching from behind. Margaret used to say they only bloomed when they felt like it, no matter what she did. Maxwell turned to find an older woman he didn't recognize, perhaps a former teaching colleague. I'm sorry, have we met? He asked. The woman smiled. No, but I know who you are. I'm Marion Lindstrom, Margaret's half-sister. Maxwell blinked in surprise. From Australia? The very same, she confirmed. I've been following your family's journey from afar. Margaret sent me photos of the twins throughout the years, kept me updated. I didn't realize you were in touch, Maxwell said, processing this new information. The lawyer mentioned you as a backup guardian, but I had the impression you weren't close. Geographically, no, Marion clarified. But we wrote regularly. I couldn't travel much because of my husband's health, but Margaret understood. She was good that way, maintaining connections despite distance. Another aspect of Margaret's life he hadn't known. I'm sorry I didn't think to contact you after. Marion waved this away. No need. I've been watching from afar. Margaret had faith in you, and it seems she was right. She gestured toward the twins, now laughing with a group of their school friends. They're thriving. We've had our challenges, Maxwell admitted. It hasn't all been smooth. Parenthood never is, Marion said with the wisdom of experience. But it's not the absence of struggle that matters. It's showing up for it day after day. It was perhaps the most accurate description of the past year that Maxwell had heard. A continuous showing up, an everyday commitment to being present, to trying again when things went wrong, to celebrating small victories. "I have something for you," Marion said, reaching into her handbag. "Margaret sent this to me years ago, but I think it belongs with you now." She handed him an envelope, yellowed with age, his name written on the front in Margaret's handwriting, younger, less formed than the letter he'd received at the funeral, but unmistakably hers. "What is this?" he asked, turning it over. "A letter she wrote but never sent, after she found out she was pregnant. She sent it to me for safekeeping. Said she wasn't brave enough to mail it then." Maxwell stared at the envelope, his heart racing. "Thank you," he managed. Marion nodded, seeming to understand his need for privacy. "I'll let you read it alone. I should go say hello to Emma and Ethan before I leave." As she walked away, Maxwell found himself unable to open the letter immediately. Instead, he watched the gathering, his children moving confidently among people who had known them their entire lives, the community that had helped Margaret raise them, the extended family they had created together. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Charlotte. "Moriyama just confirmed the partnership. Board sends congratulations. Take the weekend to celebrate with the family." Maxwell smiled at the evolution this message represented. A year ago, such news would have demanded his immediate attention, required strategic planning calls and press release drafts. Now it could wait until Monday. His company continued to thrive under his recalibrated leadership, perhaps even more so, as industry publications frequently noted. Grant Enterprises had become exactly what he'd always intended. A legacy he could be proud of. But it was no longer the only legacy, nor even the most important one. Finally, finding a moment of solitude, Maxwell carefully opened Margaret's decades-old letter. Her younger voice leapt from the page, mixing anger, confusion, and a stubborn hope that had apparently never fully abandoned her. "Max, I don't know if I'll ever send this. I'm writing with news that will change everything, but I'm afraid of how you'll respond. I'm pregnant. Twins, the doctor says, though it's early yet. Part of me wants to tell you immediately, to see if fatherhood might soften the ambition that's hardened your heart against other attachments. Part of me wants to protect these children from a father who might see them as obstacles rather than gifts. I'm choosing the latter path, at least for now, not out of spite, but out of love, for them, and, strangely, for you too. You aren't ready for this life, this balance. Maybe someday you will be. Maybe someday you'll understand that true success isn't measured in acquisitions or stock prices, but in moments of connection, in love given and received. If that day comes, perhaps our paths will cross again. Until then, know that I wish you well on your journey, even as I begin my own. Whatever else happens between us, we've created something extraordinary together. 2 lives that will carry pieces of both of us into the future. Always, Margaret." Maxwell folded the letter carefully, his vision blurred. She had known him so well, his younger self's limitations, his potential for growth. She had protected their children from his unreadiness, while somehow maintaining faith in his capacity to change. "Dad?" Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Everything okay?" Maxwell looked up to find both twins watching him with curious concern. "Yes," he said, tucking the letter into his pocket. "Just remembering." Ethan glanced at the pocket where the letter had disappeared. "Good memories." "Complicated ones," Maxwell admitted, "but important." The twins seemed to accept this, accustomed now to the occasional emergence of emotional undercurrents from the past. Their relationship had evolved to accommodate these moments, a family building its own history while honoring what came before. "Mrs. Gonzalez is asking about your rose cultivation techniques," Emma said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. Apparently, you've become something of a gardening celebrity in the neighborhood. Maxwell laughed, allowing himself to be drawn back into the celebration. Hardly. I'm still learning. Aren't we all? Ethan observed with the philosophical air he sometimes adopted. Learning as we go. As the evening progressed into night, as guests gradually departed with warm embraces and promises to stay connected, Maxwell found himself increasingly at peace. The garden lights twinkled, the twins moved easily between remaining friends, and the house, their home, stood solid behind them, containing both memories and possibilities. Later, when the last guest had left and the twins had retreated to their rooms, Maxwell sat once more in Margaret's favorite garden chair, Margaret's final letter in one hand, his phone showing Charlotte's text in the other. Past and present, personal and professional, loss and discovery. The suburban night enveloped him, so different from the Manhattan nights he'd once known. Stars visible here, crickets chirping, the occasional car passing on the quiet street. An ordinary moment in an extraordinary journey he never could have anticipated. Maxwell Grant, billionaire CEO, had once defined success through acquisition and achievement. Maxwell Grant, father, now measured it differently. Through Ethan's thoughtful questions, Emma's determined problem-solving, weekend pancake disasters, college campus visits, everyday challenges met together. He had been given a second chance at a life he'd once dismissed as incompatible with his ambitions. The irony wasn't lost on him, that in embracing what he'd once feared would limit him, he had found himself expanded, deepened, more completely alive. Margaret had known. Somehow, she had known. I've reached the end of this story, but I want it to continue through you. If this narrative touched your heart or made you reflect on your own choices, become part of our storytelling community. Hit the subscribe button. This small gesture means so much to me. Share in the comments which moment of this journey resonated with you most. And if you've experienced something similar in your own life, your stories are the true treasure of this channel, and that's why we continue here, week after week, sharing these narratives that remind us of what really matters. Until the next story, which I promise will be as special as you who stayed with me until the end.